Hello, good people. This is Tony Byrne with Scott Simmons from Real Story Group. Really excited to be with you here today. It's a topic that's near and dear to our heart, strategic lessons for MarTech leaders. Of course, who's a MarTech leader? Just by the fact that you're here means that you are almost by definition a MarTech leader. Our thinking on this has always been if you say you're a MarTech leader, then you are one. You may have a variety of different titles, but I think all of this will apply to you. At Real Story Group, we provide strategic advice, usually around stack strategies, technology selection, other related issues. So we're going to focus here really more on kind of strategic lessons. And on the point of lessons, really, I think this is why we enjoy it so much, is because over the past 25 years, we've been working with MarTech and digital leaders like you, and we've really learned a lot from you. We've learned a lot doing this work, and so we try to share this in the interest of building your career and your effectiveness. Nominally, we have contracts with your employers, we have corporations who are members, but what we really enjoy is really helping to advance the professional careers of the people we work with. And that's really the spirit by which Scott and I are going to approach today's webinar. So we'll tell you a little bit more about Real Story Group if you're new to the firm in a bit. But first, let's just jump into the topic today, because we've got 6 lessons to share in a short 30 minutes. I'll cover the first 2, and then Scott Simmons will pick up from there. The first one is the channel era, whether we like it or not, is ending. I actually think this is a good thing. It has some implications for how you spend your time and apply your resources going forward. Specifically, we'll argue number 2, that you want to think about building the core of your stack and get a little lighter at the edge. And that is some things that has implications for what you do even starting today. The third one is AI is not necessarily one thing. And so you'll really want to take more of a strategic approach to AI rather than a tactical approach. Then we'll get into from canvas to cockpit. And this is really about building the team of the future, which is going to be less about building particular experiences in a canvas and more about managing a cockpit. So Scott will tell you more about that. Really helping you think about decisioning, which is, we'll argue, is the hardest of the 3 core components of MarTech, has always been the hardest. All of you have been telling us that for 2 decades. And so what do you do about that in terms of how you approach that strategically? And then finally, thinking again, rounding out with talking about you, like what could really be, what's your next role? What's your future really, as we look towards getting towards the really the latter third of this decade. Okay, so all of you are going to get a copy of this deck, so you don't need to take notes or do screen captures. You'll all get a copy in the next 24, 48 hours. Those of you who are Real Story Group subscribers, you'll also get access to the full interactive video, and you'll be able to follow up with questions, share this with your peers, ask us to do this privately for internally for your company as kind of a brown bag, or any number of different things if you are a corporate member. Okay. So just a little bit of background. I mean, one of the exciting things about MarTech is that it has become a career path. Now, it's a different sort of career path. So it's not like AR or HR, where you're just working within the HR department. But it's definitely evolved, where I think it started out as really more working around digital marketing and doing a lot of experimentation. Then we kind of evolved that into a stack. So it's managing a stack, and that's obviously a big part of MarTech still today. Then I think we've all understood it as evolving into a discipline. And what's so interesting about the inquiries we get from our corporate members these days is we get more and more of them around ops, governance, certainly architecture, teams, and team building. And then naturally, as a career path for you, it evolves really into leadership. And so we're going to be talking today a little bit about what does it mean to be a MarTech leader, and what does it mean to be a leader to really move up a level in your enterprise, so that MarTech doesn't become kind of a capstone on your career, but really kind of, in a sense, a kind of a launching pad for where you can go going forward. So with that, let's go into some lessons for you. So first, The channel era is ending, and we'll have more to say about this over the course of the next couple of quarters. But it's not that channels are necessarily going away. And by channels, I mean like inbound web, outbound messaging, paid media, social, and so forth. The channels don't necessarily go away, but they're becoming comparatively less important. Is that they're becoming a kind of a yet another contextual element as opposed to the dominant place where you organize your team and you organize your technology. This is not going to happen overnight. It is going to be happening really, I think, most intensely by the time we get to, say, 2030. And so the next phase is not necessarily going to be more channels. It's going to be about a post-channel operating model. So just a little bit of history here to back this up. We definitely had a kind of a website era where you had a website and a CMS, maybe a little bit of email. Then we all began to understand, hey, we're in this kind of multi-channel era where we have all these different channels to manage. And that's kind of the era we're still in now. We're still trying to work our way out of it at some level, honestly. And at Real Story Group, we've talked a lot about what does omni-channel architectures mean. But while we're still in this multi-channel era, what it means is that we're making pretty significant investments in the channel, right? And we justify that by saying, well, that's where our customers are, so we're investing heavily there. And certainly that's where, your major vendors are focused as well. The problem, as you know, from all of this is it becomes very inefficient and incoherent, and it creates these integration nightmares. And so what we believe is coming here is fueled in part, really accelerated by AI, is the post-channel era, where customers are going to come to you with a variety of contextual cues, one of which will be the channel that they're in, and you'll have to address those cues based on what you know about them, based on their behavior, and AI is going to help you assemble what's the appropriate response. And so channels don't go away, but they become just another point of context. This is going to be particularly important when we think about customers showing up with agents, right? And so customers are already starting to show up with sort of buddy agents, and the agents in particular tend to be very channel agnostic, right? Like it doesn't matter to them whether you're engaging with them via an email or a paid ad or anything else. They're sifting through all of this to give kind of a channel-free message to their human customer overlord. And so it's yet another example of why channel is going to be less important. And so this is something for you to be thinking about strategically with respect to your career. And one of the many implications of this is that you're going to want to be thinking about building the core and lightening at the edge. So we sometimes call this Pilates for your stack. And what's interesting is that we were talking about this even before the ChatGPT supernova in 2022, because this was the only way to get to a kind of coherent omni-channel experience, where as new channels came in, you were able to address those individually as opposed to having to build up all this different content and data and decisioning within that channel. But what we have learned since then is that this need to really build the core and lighten at the edge has become even more critical now because of AI. AI is really accelerating this whole architectural demand. And so you really need to build out this core to be effective at AI. And so, yes, you still have these interaction environments at the edge, website, app, commerce, service, paid media, so forth. But it's these shared foundation services that are really critical for being able to deliver coherently across those channels, or to be able to deliver to a customer agent that could care less about channel. And so you have data, which we call, in a sense, a system of truth, or at least the best truth. And many of you have been working on a decoupled data environment, so that's good. Content, which is your system of meaning, and then decisioning, which is your system of direction. These are shared foundation services. This is the only way to scale. This is the only way to have a coherent customer experience. But also, when you look at what the promise of AI is, it needs all of these things to be there already to be effective within a particular channel. In other words, if you're trying to be effective using AI within your website, but it doesn't have the authoritative set of data, it doesn't have all the content it needs to do generative properly, or all the context that it needs, or all of the guardrails, then you're simply not going to succeed. And then, of course, underneath this is all kinds of enterprise operations. And this is why we're getting more and more inquiries about operations, because I think you as MarTech leaders are already sensing, look, we've got to get a handle on the governance on our work processes, AI learning loop, which Scott will talk about a little bit more because it's really critical for success with AI. So if these pillars live inside your channels, which is how most of them work, in other words, the typical kind of Adobe or Salesforce or Sitecore or pick your commerce platform, they tend to have their own data, their own content, and their own decisioning subsystem. And so you built up this big kind of monolithic, multi-tiered, layered within at the edge within the channel, which is exactly where you don't want it to be. So, and in particular, AI, it can't really make sense of that. So you want to build the core and then lighten at the edge, right? So this is what I've been talking about, avoiding the heavy edge and instead building a stronger core. We have the data, content, and decisioning. You have an AI and agentic orchestration layer, and then a light interaction tier. So we'll talk a little bit later about how to get here and what are some practical steps. So this sounds like a really big architectural shift, and indeed it is. Right? The major challenges in MarTech today, and this is a really important strategic thing for you to understand, the major challenges in MarTech today are really architectural. And so we know that you can't just like, flip the switch and suddenly go from all the heavy edge investments you've made to building up your strong core. There's a path to getting there, and we'll talk about that some more. And we posted recently on LinkedIn on this topic. You can join our mailing list and get access to all of that good information. But as a practical matter, I think one of the things you can stop doing is stop over investing in the edge. In other words, constantly sort of sucking more resources and putting more AI into the edge. Those should be more order takers rather than decision makers. And so what you really want to be doing is to try to downshift your investments there and slowly begin to migrate those resources more towards core capabilities. There's a whole set of new roles you're going to need there. You're going to need to transition some people. There's a lot to this for sure. And we're happy to help you step through this in a very logical way. Again, Scott will tell you more. But this is just really how to think about this strategically going forward in terms of not just how are you investing your stack resources, but how are you as a MarTech leader investing your own expertise and your own time as well. So Scott's going to pick up on some of these things. And of course, we have to talk about AI as a thing. Scott Simmons, why don't you take it over from here?
Thanks, Tony. So one thing we've noticed over the last year is that every vendor suddenly has an AI story, right? Every demo has AI, every roadmap has AI. The problem is that AI gets treated like a single capability when it's really several very different capabilities. So lesson 3, AI is not one thing. Next slide. So when clients ask us about AI vendors, one of the first things we do is separate them into different forms of intelligence. So there's insights AI, right? This is the AI that helps us understand something, what customers are doing, what they'll likely do next, or what patterns matter. Decisioning AI, the AI that determines what action should be taken, right? Who gets an offer, who doesn't get an offer, what message should get prioritized. Generative AI, right? This is the AI everyone sees, right? The content, the images, the copy, the conversations. And, more recently, over the past year, agentic AI, right? So layering agents on top of all of that to coordinate the capabilities. The mistake many organizations make is evaluating AI as a feature, right? The better question is, how does intelligence flow through the customer engagement system?
Yeah, and I think the temptation as a leader is to become an expert in generative AI. You don't need to become an expert in generative AI. What you need to do is understand AI as kind of a system. Of course, you need to know how it works. So I'm not telling you to be a Luddite here. What I'm telling you is if you want to be a strategic decision maker, understand how these pieces really fit together.
And that leads to some practical questions, right? So, what questions should leaders be asking? Learning. Can our systems learn across journeys, or is it just optimizing for one isolated tool? Right? We've seen platforms that get smarter inside email, but learn absolutely nothing from web, service, commerce, or loyalty interactions. Explainability. If it makes recommendations, can we explain why? Right? If the answer is the model said so, that's usually not sufficient. Governance. Can we constrain it? Right? Can we apply policies, claim rules, consent requirements, and brand standards? And portability. My favorite question, like if we switch vendors in 3 years, like what survives? Organizations have gotten smart about building data portability into contracts, but what about moving learning, right? Those four questions tend to tell us much more than whether a vendor has a co-pilot.
Yeah, I love this slide, Scott, because what this is really telling us too is like, okay, we had a prototype, but if we're going to put this into production, have we addressed these four things? That's what a MarTech leader asks.
Yeah. So on to lesson 4, right? The next lesson, it's not about technology, it's about people, right? The work changes. Next slide. So for years, marketers were trained to produce outputs, right? Campaigns, emails, pages, assets, and AI has changed that. The phrase I like here is, we're moving from canvas to copilot. I think Tony brought that up a little bit earlier. So the old model, we would build things, launch things, and then manage things. But in the new model, we basically supervise systems, monitor decisions, tune logic, and review outcomes. The question shifts from did we launch the campaign to is the system making the right decisions? Next slide. And when the work changes, as Tony mentioned earlier, the roles change, right? So a few examples, journey overseers. Someone needs to own customer health across the entire life cycle. Experience orchestrators. Someone needs to resolve conflicts between objectives. Think revenue, retention, service, and trust. And agent controllers. Someone needs to decide how the organization appears through machines. Customers increasingly won't experience your brand directly. They'll experience your brand through an agent. Right? I don't think these are necessarily new job titles. I think they're capabilities your current team members will begin to develop if they're not developing them already.
Yeah, that's a great point. They may not be titles right away. They could be in the future. But if we were going to prioritize these, Scott, I might suggest that marketing data ops and graph managers is something you ought to be thinking about today. Like somebody should really be doing that. Agent controllers might be coming next if you're experimenting with that. It's interesting to think about what to do today, and those come to mind certainly.
All right, so I think this is probably the most important lesson in the deck because decisioning sounds technical, but it's actually leadership. So lesson 5, decisioning is the hardest hill. Next. So every organization has competing objectives, right? Revenue versus service, acquisition versus retention, personalization versus privacy, automation versus trust. So the question isn't whether AI can make a decision. The question is, which objective wins when objectives conflict? So here's an example. If a customer is angry and has an open support issue, should we sell to them, help them, escalate them, or leave them alone? Right? That's a decisioning problem. Bad creative is risky, but bad logic is even worse. So
Yeah.
Tony, we also haven't explicitly talked about responsible AI. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this sounds like some decisioning engine is going to make all these hard decisions for me. And actually, the idea is that you make kind of the hardest decisions yourself and put those inputs in, and then the decisioning engine just makes a bunch of easy decisions at scale. But you see that big thing around customer trust there, and that's going to be really important, not just from a regulatory standpoint, but also I think there's key issues of integrity and ethics here, obviously, and clearly governance. And we don't want to downplay any of those. That the governance you're going to need and the inputs that you put in this decisioning engine and the oversight of it It's going to be really, really critical. I mean, this slide makes it look like it's all just, the machines are going to take over. And in a very real sense, they're going to be more, even with decisioning, it's going to be more like worker bees than queen bee.
Yeah.
This is a good time to remind you, if you have any questions or concerns, anything you agree with, disagree with, or you'd like to ask in any way, feel free to use the questions function in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's a little kind of box, a speaker box that you see an icon with a little question in it, should be in the top right. And feel free to use that to ask us any question that you have, or just make any kind of comment or something you might want to disagree with. And we'll definitely have time for that. Okay, this is maybe the most exciting thing, Scott. MarTech leader's next role.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this final lesson is really where all the others come together. So, we've talked about architecture, AI, decisioning, and we talked about some of the new roles that are emerging. But all those trends are pushing MarTech leaders toward a broader role, right? So the future opportunity isn't becoming a better platform owner. Lesson 6, becoming a customer engagement leader. So when we talk about the strongest MarTech leaders, they don't spend most of their time talking about tools, right? They spend most of their time connecting people, priorities, and capabilities. Think about everything we've discussed today, right? Channels become context, AI becomes a system rather than a feature, decisioning becomes more important than execution, and new roles emerge around orchestration and governance. No single department owns all of these things. Marketing doesn't, technology doesn't, data doesn't, operations doesn't. So somebody has to connect them. The role increasingly becomes less about administering technology and more about aligning the customer engagement system. The best MarTech leaders I've worked with are translators, right? They translate business goals into technology requirements, customer needs into data requirements, governance requirements into operational processes, and AI capabilities into business outcomes. What struck me over the last year is that AI is increasing the value of these leaders, right? A lot of people assumed AI would simplify things. In reality, it's creating more decisions, more governance, more coordination, and more need for someone who can see the whole picture. The leaders who thrive over the next few years won't be the ones who know the most tools. They'll be the ones who can bring together technology, data, content, AI, and customer experience into a coherent strategy. And once you start looking at customer engagement that way, you start to realize that even the term MarTech may be too limiting. So Tony, anything you want to add before you kind of take us home?
Yeah, it's so interesting because we could almost talk about the customer technology stack, but the other provocative thing here you said is your next role is not owning the stack, and there's some truth to that. That's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, you still need to manage a stack today. You've got basic questions, basic roadmaps for all the different platforms that you might oversee, or that you are the product manager overseeing all of them. But I think if you think about a lot of those tools getting kind of lighter at the edge and more getting pushed into more infrastructural foundations where you're kind of partnering with data and IT, it could be that your overall tool ownership does become a little bit lighter. And this doesn't mean a diminishment in your role. If anything, it's kind of an expansion of your role, as Scott mentioned, in terms of having to get all these pieces together. And you'll have to be more closely aligned with your data and IT leaders than ever before. So what we're talking about obviously is not simple. These are strategic lessons, strategic advice for you as a leader. It's all the stuff and the nice diagrams certainly sound cool and look cool. You're probably asking, how do I get there? And so I'll just offer a short commercial here that our mission in life is to help you get there. And I think we're uniquely positioned to do that at Real Story Group because, we're not like a traditional analyst firm that produces these ridiculous mystical quadrants. We don't advise vendors. We just sit on your side of the table. Our mission in life is to make your firm successful and make you successful as a MarTech leader. That's all we do. And it turns out that's pretty unique. And I think we've got some unique experience there. So definitely would welcome following up with you on that. But let's close out with something. We like to try to close out with something practical. So if I missed something here, Scott, let me know. But it's a little bit of an action plan, which is, first of all, you really want to think about inventorying your channels, your contexts, and your core asset here. So a lot of you have done a good job inventorying your core data, your content, sometimes not so much. Some of the decisioning logic that you have, maybe not so much. You have to know where you're at to know where you're going forward. And it's not just a stack diagram anymore. I think we need to be thinking about this from more of a services perspective. Then think about your capacity to move one journey more to the core. In other words, take it out of a channel and into a core. There's different technologies there that you may have that can help you do that. We've helped some organizations kind of transition there. Then applying lessons 3 and 5, really evaluating your true AI capabilities and what you're going to need to do to be effective with it, not just in terms of a prototype, but actual capabilities cross-platform that you can put into production. And the minute you start messing around, particularly with agents, you need to really deal with the key issues, explainability and trust. And then finally, do what I think you've always been doing well, but you're going to have to do more of it, and delegate other work so you can find time to do it, is really to build alignment across technology, data, and then increasingly other types of customer experience as well. Because if you don't take the lead on this kind of future customer facing stack, it's possible no one else will. We think that as the MarTech leader, you're kind of uniquely positioned to own what the customer experience is going to be more generally in this AI inflected future. And so really picking out your North Star, strengthening your foundations, and then leading the enterprise beyond the stack. I think these are things you can start doing in 2026. And certainly, if there's any way we can help you do that, feel free to stay in touch. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Scott Dill, who will talk about next steps. And then we'll take a look. It looks like some questions have already come in. So we'll take a look at those real quickly here.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott and Tony. This was really, really good content. And, we appreciate you taking us through this, and also appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. For those that are interested in upcoming webinars, we have another one coming up on the 18th that'll walk through the future of journey orchestration. So another topic that's near and dear to our hearts. And then as MarTech leaders, it's always an opportunity to learn from other MarTech leaders at our Stack Leadership Council. We have meetings every quarter, including one coming up next week. So if that's something you'd like to learn more about, so you can reach out to us at the coordinates below, and we'll be happy to share some information about how we've developed this council, completely vendor-free, of MarTech leaders learning from and networking with each other. So I do see some questions have come in. I'll turn the
yeah. So we've got some questions and some comments. So Steve is saying, great insights. Will the recording be available? Steve, you'll get a copy of the deck if your corporation, if your firm is a corporate member of Real Story Group, then you get access to the full recording. Mike is asking a really interesting question, Scott Simmons. How do you know if the decision, I guess we should call it your decision because you're ultimately accountable for it, but it was a decision that was made by a decisioning AI platform. How do you know if that decision was wrong?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think you need to be tracking KPIs around everything that's going on within your system, and I think those KPIs will tell you if your systems are making the wrong decisions or not.
Yeah. And I think you've talked about, well, that sort of the tracking and auditing and everything that goes into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, governance is huge around all of this, and traceability, right? You should be able to look back into the systems and understand why decisions were made.
Right.
So, if you come across something that you feel is the wrong decision, you should be able to investigate it and determine why the decision was made, and maybe it was the right call. Maybe there was something wrong with the logic.
Yeah, there's so many different, Mike, we've talked about before the loop, in the loop, on the loop, and after the loop, 4 different roles for humans in this whole looping thing. And this will be more human intensive than I think a lot of people may have originally thought. And that's why you really want to build things that are going to work at scale. So Mike also has a really interesting question, or really comment here. He says, I hope there are some CMOs on the call. I've lost 2 job opportunities because I didn't have hands-on experience with Braze. So Braze is a particular outbound messaging platform, a single tool. And so I've lost 2 job opportunities in the last 2 months because they used it and I didn't have experience. Yeah, well, that's kind of bullshit on their behalf, if you ask me. I mean, the thing is, Mike, is I would say those jobs probably weren't strategic. They were probably tactical if they really wanted you to know how Braze worked. Because Braze, although it's a very advanced package, it does a couple of things. It sends emails, it helps you orchestrate campaigns, and it can do push messages around the world. I mean, technically it's complicated, but the real value there is not in the tool expertise. I think you probably know that. That's why you're here. And any CMO who thought that was never going to have you be a strategic MarTech leader. And so I'm hoping that you see that as dodging a bullet and not actually losing an opportunity, because that's I think how I would read that. So let's see. Here's another interesting question, Scott. Should you be running RFPs to find lighter edge vendors? How do you decide on the orders? Beyond cost savings, how should you get improved ROI with the adoption of AI?
There's a few questions in there.
Yeah.
So let's start with the edge. I mean, I would start, as you mentioned earlier, with the core, right? So let's make sure your core systems are in place before we start kind of modifying some of those edge vendors. Most of the vendors you have today can probably play or fit the role of an edge system, right? Like even the older version of Sitecore XP could play the role of edge presentation with kind of another centralized content store. So I would focus more on the core, and I wouldn't necessarily jump directly to RFPs unless you're in that phase of the process. RFI might be a good step to move forward with, just to see what might be available out there, especially with the vendors that you might already have in play.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because a big part of what we do is help clients select technology. We wrote a book about it, Agile Approach to Selecting Technology. And this has always been an area that we take a lot of pride in. But the reality is, particularly as it relates to these sort of edge technologies, or what are increasingly becoming edge technologies, is that we're beginning in the last year to start telling some of our corporate members, look, I know you have a problem with vendor XYZ, but you might not want to switch them right now. You might, but you might not, because it's going to be such a different world 2 years from now. Maybe you should just hang on to them and then work on building what is going to be a replacement for them, as opposed to going from CMS 1 to CMS 2. Now, there are cases where we do recommend it, where your timeframes might be a little longer, or the circumstances are such that you're having so painful with your existing ESP, for example, potentially Braze, which is a dishonest company with a very overrated platform. So I can see why I might want to get out of Braze, right? So, maybe you should switch out of Braze. But anyway, I mean, there is a case to be swapping horses there, but it's a less strong case than it was, because there's a possibility that the likes of Braze are just going to go away. So with that, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks again for your questions and engagement. We're going to have more webinars like this on these topics. We're also going to have a couple of webinars coming up that are private, exclusive, just for our corporate members, on some really interesting new research that we're doing, some deeper dives on some practical measures around some of what we've introduced today. So please stay in touch. Always great to connect with you. So for my 2 colleagues, Scott and Scott, this is Tony Byrne from Real Story Group signing off for now. So long.
Bye, everybody.